ordinary people can deconstruct ambiguity in order to have an ordinary life within an abnormal context. From the one side, there's a lot of pressure for you to have a normal life. On the other hand, there are barriers. In order to have a normal life, you have to really negotiate these barriers. They are using existing cultural tools to negotiate concepts created by the powerful people.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Idioms of Normality. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Mason, and we're doing a little mini-series on the contributors to an edited volume called The Anthropology of Ambiguity. And I'm joined today by Professor Anton Piyarathne from the Open University of Sri Lanka. He's the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and he's got a lot to say about ambiguity and normality. Anton, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. Happy to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. We're so pleased that you could join us. We are interested in finding about this edited volume and how it speaks to the topic of ambiguity and normality. But let me ask you to kick things off. What brought you to the topic of ambiguity?
Yeah, it's really interesting question, Paul. Thank you very much for asking this. And, I have been living in Sri Lanka for last so many years, and we have been going through various time periods. And in general, as a person who was born in a normal family, we have been going through various socio-economic, political, cultural changes. And when I reflect now as a student in anthropology or scholar in anthropology, I was trying to understand basically the reasons behind this. And I was trying to understand, reflect my own history rationally, theoretically, from theoretical standpoints of views that I study. So there are, it was not really a clear path for us to navigate. We were going through a lot of difficulties, especially we were Sri Lanka was under Portuguese, British, and Dutch. And 1948 we got independence, and I was born in 1973. And from my childhood, I went through ethnic riots and also riots of young people in the country. Who were trying to change the country. And I was a young guy and trying to understand why this is happening. And I have seen a lot of people were killed, and I was trying to figure it out why they were killed and why I was surviving, why my family members are surviving, and also how it happened. I was living in basically I'm from a plantation background, and I was living with ethnically Tamil community, Indian descent plantation Tamil community, and they were undergoing a lot of harassments by majoritarian Sinhalese due to politicized ethnicities in the country. Then I noticed that how they were brutally attacked and also not attacked, and how they survived. In the meantime, when I was in my high schools, young people of the country took weapons against then regime, and they were fighting against the regime, and they were trying to change the regime. And we could not go to school for some period, and it was horror everywhere, killing, dead bodies were floating on the rivers, either side of the roads, and we were small kids walking to school, and we could not really, continue whole day in the school. Suddenly, we were asked to go home, etc. And this background, the experience I had with Sinhalese community and also Tamil community contributed me to think of this ambiguous situation now from a theoretical standard points that I studied. That's the basically background led me to think of ambiguity, Paul.
Wow. Okay. I find it interesting that at the beginning you said I grew up in a normal family, because those circumstances sound very outside what people might think of as normal. Situation of conflict, access to school, lack of access to school, growing up with a very particular political history to the country, the colonial history, and then going to school and seeing dead bodies in the river, that is full on. But it brought you to some really important questions. The questions of ambiguity, and the question we like to ask people in this series is, what is normal? And I really want to ask that question in light of everything you've just said, because you would have a very particular take on that question. So let me ask you, what is normal?
Yeah, in general, normal, according to my experience in Sri Lanka, there are a lot of normalities. There are a lot of normal conditions for the people live in various regions in the country. And I lived in a particular normal conditions, linked with Indian plantation Tamil community, rural Sinhalas, and rural Sri Lanka. So that is the normality for me. But our people were living in, multiple normalities. So this is the normal situation for me, where I experience ethno-national riots, and also we were living amidst the war between Sri Lankan government forces and the Tamil rebels, and most probably soldiers went from our villages, and after grade 10 also, one of the main objective them was to join with the Sri Lanka military and fight in the war, mainly happened in the northern and eastern parts of the country. So that is the kind of normal life I lived, and my parents had normal life. They were, like any other Tamil or Sinhala person in my region, plantation Tamil community. So they were living with the kind of, every day they went for jobs, various jobs in every day in order to earn an income. So for us, the normality was the reality that we constructed within the surrounding mountains. Of course, my village was surrounded by huge mountains, and I was thinking one day I should go beyond. I should see beyond these mountains, and my normality was very small, very small. My village was covered with these small mountains, and the norm the everyday peaceful life that we had was connected to the broader realities of the country, that is socio-economic, political, cultural hegemony came from the outside. For us, people who lived surrounded by these mountains while having a normal life in our village, we were trying to get linked with the get connected with the broader realities outside, and ethnic hatred, racial hatred, class hatred, discrimination, all those came beyond those mountains. We were trying to manage those forces and have our own comfortable lifestyle. That was the normality for me.
Wow, it's such a great description of your understanding of normality, because it really highlights that, well, you said it yourself, normality is something we constructed within the boundaries of the hills where we lived, the mountains where you lived. But that in stepping outside of that normal and reaching outside that community, it also introduced ideas that challenged the normal, comfortable life, and that you had to manage the introduction of those ideas and the way in which they presented different understandings of what was happening in your local village. So you mentioned that when we were talking about what brought you to the topic of ambiguity, you also mentioned that ambiguities were brought into various communities and were contested as well. What were some of these ambiguities that were brought into your community, and how were they contested?
Yeah, very interesting question, Paul. My explanation here really should be understood within the context of ethno-national riots happen in the country, and also young people's uprising against the rulers, the ruling elites of the country, which happened in 1971 at one point before I born, and during my lifetime, 88, 89, they took weapons against the rulers in the country. And this is the context in which my life unfolded. In Sri Lanka, basically, in the post-independent period since 1948, there were two groups of elites. The group of elites, people coming from high-class families who had relationship with the colonial masters. So they were basically Western educated, English-speaking elite community. The second group is the rural mass, people coming from rural ordinary masses of the country who studied under the state education system. Basically, it is vernacular education, and they got education. They got high school pass, and they went to universities. They got access to all the theoretical background produced by the West, but they didn't have capacity to speak in English, write in English, and also they did not belong to that particular culture. So there were clashes between these two group throughout the 1948 onwards up to today. Because today our new president took the office, and that really kind of peak of this struggle between these two classes, but we are yet to witness how it unfolds in the future. So in this context, people who had various normal lifestyles around the country were dealing with state in the sense the government formed by these few families who had relationship to the colonial masters were trying to adopt various strategies to be in power, continuously be in power. And once they are retired, their family members became presidents, prime ministers, ministers, etc. So in this context, they were using caste, class, ethnicity, religion, gender, mythology. So mythology was very nicely used in order to confuse the mindset of the ordinary people. Because in our way of understanding the world is connected to cosmology, connected to invisible world, and these political class, the elites have nicely crafted all the phenomena and shaped the public sphere through the media that they had. So in such a context, people had limited chance to challenge this, because the suppression came from the state. Suppression came from the accepted and unacceptable means. In such a context, people happen to have a normal lifestyle. They happen to meet the existential realities: food, house, shelter, all these things. So this is where the people use traditional tactics, the traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge to live with this modern tactics of continuation of power by one or several class of people.
I want to follow up more on the question of mythologies that were being perpetuated.
Yeah.
Because that was interesting that you were saying certain mythologies were deployed as a way to control people, and also to control who had power over changing the mythology. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, actually, mythology was used to safeguard the privileges of one particular class of people.
Interesting. So mythology was used to legitimate power.
That's right. Yes.
Interesting. Wow. Can you give us an example of one of these myths that was sustained?
Actually, one of the persistent myth was explained in my chapter called Grease Yakā. And this particular phenomena came up for the first time in my history, knowing history, appeared in 1991. Then there were rumors, particular president who was there in Sri Lanka during that period, used Malayali, clergies, the Malayali from India. They were brought to Sri Lanka and performed various rituals for him to be in power forever. However, exactly 1991 and exactly to 2011, this came back again. So Grease Yakā is a mythical concept. Of course, the Yakā is demon, but here it is not really a demon. A human who applied grease liquid so that nobody can catch him and he can easily escape, and went into houses where the virgin women were alone. Actually, this happened in a Ramazan period, where virgin women were there, and the boogeyman was trying to get certain blood, blood out of the boobs in order to perform ritual for one of the powerful politicians for politicians to be in power, reign the country forever. He needed this blood, drops of blood, in order to perform a ritual for him to get sword made out of gold, used by one of the previous kings called Dutugamunu. So that is why he wanted blood, and that is the kind of story spreaded one of the regions where I did my research during my PhD research. So this really created a lot of panic in the minds of ordinary Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim men. And we are a male-dominant society, and women's body is kind of pure concept for us. So it really created nice panic situations in the mind of everybody, so that the politicians actually benefit went to the ruling class. Then there are a lot of allegations against corruption, misappropriation of the state funds, etc. Right now, we are a bankrupt nation. Why we became bankrupt was because of the activities of this ruling class. And ruling class were using this finely crafted idea for about 2 years in order to hide their tactics to steal state funds. That is one of the examples used in which I developed this concept. This chapter where I illustrated how ordinary people can deconstruct ambiguity in order to have an ordinary life within an abnormal context.
So let me just check in with you. Was Grease Yakā being used? Grease Yakā is a myth. That's correct.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yes, mythical man, boogeyman.
Mythical bogeyman.
That's right.
And Grease Yakā was being told to the public.
Yes.
As though people are trying to threaten our order, or are they saying we have?
Actually, this concept is known to everybody. However, there were incidents happen. Suddenly, in particular night, one man creep into a house and trying to harass a person. Then they start shouting. Then entire village gather, and this man runs away. And in certain situations, he had ran away and ran into the military camps or police stations. So similarly, a lot of stories were created. Stories happened, and nobody was arrested. The panic was so much so that a lot of outsiders were killed. And during this period, I was doing my fieldwork on the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. And at one night, I was going to attend ritual in the village temple. And as I was walking through the paddy field, suddenly a group of people with clubs encircled, and they were appearing out of the paddy field with clubs. I thought that is the end of my life. And then as they were approaching us, they understood who we were and then had a nice discussion. So same way, a lot of people were killed. Basically, strangers were killed in those villages, and nobody really.
So they thought you could have been potentially the demon.
Yes, Grease Yakā. Yeah. So Grease Yakā, everybody was suspected as Grease Yakās. That could be school teacher, that can be breadman, that can be farmer, that can be, that can be anybody. So each and everybody was suspected.
And just for the record, you are not Grease Yakā?
No.
No. Okay, good. We've got that out of the way. How did you convince these people that, this is the power of myth, right? The myth was so powerful that people were going into paddy fields with clubs, ready to beat up a stranger in the potentiality that this person is a demon.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you find the space to say, whoa, hold up. No, I'm just here to document the ritual that's about to take place tonight. I'm here.
Yeah. In this particular village, we have been living for about a year. We were living in a house, and actually my research assistant was very much familiar to those guys. And because of my research assistant, my life was saved.
Wow.
So this as we live for a longer period, they understand who are strangers, who are non-villagers, etc. Yeah.
That is,
And villagers had various ways of checking the genuineness of the fact that we are revealing to them. Whenever I say something, I am here for a research, etc. The whole day they have been watching what I am doing, whether I am doing anything unnecessary, anything threatening to their lives. They have been watching throughout the day. In
okay.
fact, Paul, there were situations. Actually, we were living in a caste divided village, and there were kind of they were kind of doing patrolling as well. Sudden visits to my house to see whether we are visiting low caste family members' houses. Some of the high caste family members they made sudden visits to my house to see whether we have any interaction with the low caste villages. Of course, we happen to manage all the relationship. We happen to keep relationship all caste, all ethno-religious people with all ethno-religious backgrounds. So that is the kind of to highlight you the level of scrutiny by the villagers.
This is fascinating. And in the book chapter for the edited volume on the Anthropology of Ambiguity, you write about how political ambiguity was constructed by combining myths and the occult in a manner that the public could not disentangle. So people were convinced of these myths, but also they didn't have the power to pull them apart and see them just as myths. But you did operate with that theoretical perspective that allowed you to have some distance from that myths. Can you tell us a bit more about that process?
Yeah. So actually, the reality for us was state or political parties' concerned hegemony was there in this myth, and actually we could not complain against these activities in the police station, right? So police was always suspicious of the person who went there to make complaints. And in fact, medical doctors or counselors during this period, they said Sri Lanka was under, post-war context, and everybody was in a kind of mass psychological disorder. So they were telling, there should be, mass counseling should happen in the country. The state suppression, the politicians' suppression, and powerful elite suppression. Amidst this, the people happen to meet everyday existential needs: food, shelter, clothes, everyday lifestyle, everyday occupation, etc. So how did they manage in everyday life? Everyday jokes, right? And also statements which would give double meanings, right? And we would not talk anything directly, right? Man who was wearing shovel, right? Man who was wearing maroon shovel, etc. So that is to refer to the powerful politician. Through everyday jokes, through everyday statements which would have double meanings, we were able to understand each other's genuineness and also honesty. That is how the local reality or space is created in order to have an everyday life. The same theory is applied in the cartoons. In the cartoons, so that cartoonists, part of this chapter, I analyzed some of the cartoons published during this period. Cartoonists gave powerful message to the people and also to the power holders without antagonizing them. So Sri Lanka has a history of burning down media institutions, burning down media radio stations, burning down television stations, etc. So without antagonizing so-called power holders, the cartoonist gave a powerful message to the people of this country about the unknown situation, and it helped people to understand what this is, to get a sense of what that is, and also understand the way of living with that.
So the cartoon had permission to do this because other agencies would have been attacked, but no one's yes. attacking the cartoon studio.
That's right. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting about culture change and public education and the vehicles you use for engaging the public. It's easy to see the myths in other societies or in past societies. It's harder to see the myths in our own society, right? Because,
Yeah.
if you're Christian, Jesus isn't a myth. Jesus is a reality. If you're Hindu, then, Ganesha isn't a myth. Ganesha is a reality, or Lakshmi, or Hanuman, and but from the inside, establishing that something is a myth is kind of interesting. So, and some people talk about normality as though it's a myth. So, coming from the outside and looking at, say, Euro-American cultures with that history of the myth of normality, and taking on board your theoretical approach, which suggests that let's look at myths as politically constructed in order to gain benefit from ambiguity and to sustain certain kinds of power structures. How do you think we should approach the myth of normality?
It's really interesting, and as let's say students in anthropology or ethnography, so when we go to a society, we are trying to understand the hidden rules of the ordinary behavior, and they are actually you tend to feel when you normally feel response. You normally feel the fear. Fear psychology. Everyone is in panic. Now 6 o'clock. I should be at home. Brother, aren't you going home? Now 6 o'clock. The last bus is coming. After that, Grease Yakā is everywhere. Your life will be in threatened. So the fear is everywhere. Then
Understanding what people are afraid from is the first hint.
that's right. Yes.
Interesting. So I'm afraid of going out in public without putting on deodorant.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
So
Suddenly, we've got to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Then in such a situation, what you should be doing? I mean, from the one side, there's a lot of pressure for you to have a normal life, and on the other hand, there are barriers, and you have to, in order to have a normal life, you have to really negotiate this barrier. So people have, I mean, they are not using totally innovative, I mean, totally new things. They are using existing cultural tools to negotiate this culture connected concepts created by the powerful people. Because why I say powerful people, in the sense the benefit went into them. Right? They were the beneficiaries. They were the beneficiaries. Massive sum of money is stolen, and that is why Sri Lanka became bankrupt, and everything went unaccountable. So they were the beneficiaries, and we were the losers. However, we were trying to live within this ambiguous situation in order to have a social life.
So
Until
follow the
Sri Lanka,
money.
yeah,
Follow the money. Who is profiting from the myth? Who is profiting from the myth of Grease Yakā? Who's profiting from the myth of normality? And then you'll see who's selling us on this. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's step 2. Good. I'm following. Keep going.
Right. So yeah. So I mean that this is in general. I was doing this research in 4 locations during this particular period. One is Colombo middle class community. The second community is Colombo Shanti community. The other community is on the eastern coast, purely Muslim community, and the second community, Sinhala Tamil, join hybrid community. So the way that they have dealt with this ambiguous situation, so-called Grease Yakā, was 4 different, were really 4 unique ways. Actually, in the middle class background, not this sort of things happen. But just next to the middle class setting, there was a lower class Chanti community where this was a more often reality, right? Somebody walk on the iron roof, and they heard the sound. The following day, they found certain clues, pieces of clothes of pieces of clothes which do not belong to that particular community, etc. In the Muslim community, it was totally different. They were negotiating the Sinhala dominant state. Sinhala dominant state, the president is Sinhalese, the prime minister and the entire cabinet, or most of the cabinet members of the cabinet are Sinhalese. So they had separate viewpoint. Then other traditional society was totally different, where they had rituals, etc. So simply people understood ambiguity according to the knowledge that they have, according to local realities, and they were able to deconstruct the ambiguity and they were trying they invented ways of negotiating with this ambiguity in order to cover normal lifestyle. That is the beauty of ambiguity in as I observed in my field locations.
Can you give us a concrete example of how they challenged ambiguity?
So when it comes to this particular Muslim community on the eastern coast, so they were against Grease Yakā, and they were against state intervention. They were very much suspicious of military officials, etc. Then what they did was, in this particular community had Sinhalese, Muslims, and Tamils, and they were trying to understand. They were checking each other, right? Whether the Sinhala neighbor was, Sinhala neighbor had any suspicious activities, whether the Sinhalese neighbor was having relationship with strangers, etc. So they were trying to clear the neighbors, and also in the meantime they were trying to strengthen their relationship. And they really created WhatsApp groups, so they always gave phone calls. So that is one of the strategies which really created doubts of the neighbor, cleared the doubts of neighbor. And during this period, actually, some of the respondents did not want us to visit their houses, as we are from Colombo, and we stopped our research during this period, during visiting their houses during this particular period. And also everyday jokes, right? Everyday joke was a way of checking the genuineness of your neighbor. Judgments, right? They were searching for clues. And in everyday negotiations, interactions, we were very much friendly, using jokes, using statements which have double meanings in the sense, one of the statement should have shown one idea. Basically, we are almost same.
Do you have an example of one of these jokes? Are they appropriate for a general audience?
I can't really remember exact example, but it was situational.
Very situational.
It was situational because your respondents' political background, ethnic background, religious background, according to that only we will have to say.
Do jokes sort of ease the tension, but also create permission for two people who might have a different background to occupy the same space?
That's right. Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Anton, this is super fascinating, and I hope people go on to read your chapter in this edited volume. I know that I'm really going to benefit from listening to your answer to the next question, and I'll recognize if you need some time to think about it. But what questions do you think we should ask when studying myth? What questions should we ask about myth?
What questions we should be asking about myths is that actually it would be very difficult to ask particular questions, but it depends on it is based on the situation. And right now, Sri Lanka, in Sri Lankan context, with this political victory, etc., we are trying to construct modern state. However, that is what I understood. However, it is based on the situation, and basically, in order to understand myths, we should be observing how they have normal life. That is what we should be doing before asking questions. For an example, when I went to this particular village with my research assistant, the first thing what he did was he went to the village temple and made a vow, asking God's support for him to go back to his village without finding a partner from this particular village. In fact, he had a girlfriend in his village, and there's a statement: if somebody comes to this particular village, they never go back. They never go back in the sense they marry there. So, and this particular research assistant understood the particular myth of the village, and the only solace he had was to expecting support from the village temple. So he went to the temple and he performed certain rituals, and he safely went back to his village after 1 year. Yes.
That's interesting. So you're pointing out there that the myth becomes a normal part of someone's lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so the question that is of interest to you is, how does something that could be construed as fantasy by one person, but reality for another person, how does it become embedded so seamlessly with someone's daily practices that that actions that demonstrate a belief in the myth appear to be completely casual, ordinary, and expected?
Yeah, that's right.
Professor Anton Piyarathne, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being so candid about sharing your experiences growing up in Sri Lanka and the situations that you've lived through, studied, observed, and written about. It's been a real honor to learn more about your research. Thank you for joining us on Idioms of Normality, and for everyone at home, thank you very much for listening. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Mason, and Idioms of Normality is part of the collective podcast series called Future Frame TV, hosted by Traces&Dreams.
Thank you very much, Paul, for having me in this discussion.